The fog was thick that evening, the sort of London mist that blurred lamplight into smeared halos and made footsteps sound hollow against the wet pavements. Tommy Beresford drew the collar of his overcoat higher and glanced across at his wife. Tuppence's eyes sparkled in the half-light, undaunted by the gloom. She had always insisted that fog was a cloak for intrigue, and tonight she was not wrong. They had received the message only an hour earlier, a discreet telephone call requesting their presence at Whitehall. No explanations offered, merely the unmistakable urgency of government business. Now, as their taxi deposited them at the imposing stone facade, both felt the familiar thrill that came whenever the world of secrets and shadows beckoned them back. Inside, the corridors of Whitehall were hushed, echoing with the click of typewriter keys behind closed doors and the faint smell of pipe smoke. They were met by a tall man in a dark suit, his expression carefully neutral. Without a word, he gestured them into a private office. The room was stark. Mahogany desk, a few files neatly stacked, a single lamp throwing circles of amber light. Behind the desk sat a senior MI6 officer they both knew by reputation, if not by name, Sir Reginald Harcourt. His grey hair was clipped with military precision, his eyes sharp as steel. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said, his voice clipped as though every word had been weighed and rationed. "I wish our meeting were under less delicate circumstances." Tuppence leaned forward, her gloved hands folded. "Delicate circumstances sound very much like our sort of business, Sir Reginald." A faint smile ghosted his lips. "So I have been told. That is precisely why you were summoned." He opened the top file on his desk, though he did not slide it forward. Instead, he tapped it once, sharply, as though it were dangerous to let it travel further. "A file has gone missing. Not just any file, you understand, but one tied to operations conducted during the war. Names, dates, operations that were never meant to see the light of day, and more importantly, connections that touch upon our current diplomatic negotiations." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Meaning that if it fell into the wrong hands—" "It already has," Harcourt interrupted, his tone grim. "Or at least it was removed deliberately. We do not yet know how far it has travelled. If certain foreign agents obtain it, the consequences could be disastrous. Governments fall, alliances collapse. That file is dynamite bound in leather." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "And you've called us, not your own people, because—" The officer's glance flicked to the closed door before returning. "Because this theft points to someone within our walls. If I cannot trust all my staff, I must look outside. You, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, have a reputation for moving in circles we cannot easily penetrate. Society trusts you, and—" His lips tightened. "Our enemies underestimate you. That is an advantage." Tommy gave a short laugh. Not the first time underestimation has been our ally. But Tuppence's instincts were already humming. "You said the file was last seen at a dinner." Harcourt nodded curtly. "Yes, 3 nights ago. A private supper at the Westminster Club, restricted guest list. Ambassadors, a retired colonel, 1 or 2 of our younger attachés, and a certain foreign socialite whose presence was tolerated. The file was in a locked attaché case. By the end of the evening it was gone." "And no one noticed?" Tommy asked. No one admitted to noticing. Silence stretched, heavy with implication. Somewhere beyond the walls, a clock struck 9, its chimes muffled by the fog. Tuppence broke the silence. "You must realize you're dropping us into a nest of snakes. Spies, diplomats, and whoever else was clever enough to walk away with your file." "That is precisely why you must tread carefully," Harcourt said. "Ask questions, observe. I cannot give you official sanction, nor can I shield you if matters go awry. But if you succeed, well, the gratitude of His Majesty's government is not a trifling thing." Tommy leaned back in his chair, studying the man. "And if we fail?" "Then you must hope you never learn what's inside that file." The lamplight cast long shadows across the desk, and for a moment Tommy felt the weight of the task settle heavily upon him. This was not one of their light-hearted adventures. The stakes here were national, perhaps international. When at last they rose to leave, Harcourt stopped them with a single parting remark. "One last thing. Be watchful. I've reason to believe your movements are already being observed. The very fact that you answered my call will not have gone unnoticed." Outside, the fog seemed thicker still. The taxi they had ordered was waiting, its driver a shapeless silhouette. Tommy offered his arm to Tuppence, but she shook her head with a mischievous grin. "Don't look so glum, Tommy. You know as well as I do that the more dangerous the game, the more interesting it becomes." He chuckled, though unease prickled the back of his neck. "I was afraid you'd say that." As the taxi pulled away from Whitehall, its tyres hissing on the damp streets, Tommy peered through the rear window. A second motorcar slid into view, headlights dimmed, keeping a discreet distance. "Tuppence," he murmured. "It seems Harcourt was right. We've already got company." She smiled, calm as ever, and pulled the anonymous note from her handbag, the one that had been slipped to her when they'd entered Whitehall. In the dim glow of the taxi's lamp she read the words aloud. The file was not lost. It was taken. The taxi turned into the mist, carrying them deeper into the labyrinth of intrigue that London always seemed ready to provide. The Westminster Club was one of those august institutions that carried its secrets in the carved wood of its panelling and the thick carpets underfoot. Its brass nameplate gleamed discreetly on a stone facade that had seen more than a century of discreet whispers, political bargaining, and the occasional scandal hushed with port. To be invited to supper here was both an honour and a warning, an indication that one's reputation, for good or ill, had reached ears that mattered. Tommy and Tuppence arrived arm in arm, she in a dark sapphire gown that caught the light from the chandeliers, he in evening dress, every bit the genial man about town. Yet beneath their polished appearance ran the undercurrent of their true purpose. They were not here to be entertained, they were here to see what others tried to conceal. The dining room was already filling. Heavy oak panels climbed the walls, interrupted only by portraits of grim-faced statesmen and generals. The long table glowed under shaded lamps, crystal decanters flashing red and gold as servants poured wine with practised discretion. Tuppence's sharp eyes surveyed the gathering. A retired colonel, ramrod straight despite the years, stood by the mantel, his hand lingering too often on his glass. At his side, a junior attaché fumbled with his napkin, his nervous glances betraying an unease that no amount of polished manners could disguise. Across the room, laughter rippled from a knot of diplomats surrounding a striking woman in silver satin, Madame Varela, foreign, charming, and clearly accustomed to being the axis around which attention revolved. Tommy leaned closer to his wife. "Looks like our stage is set. One colonel, one greenhorn, one femme fatale. Which horse are you backing?" Tuppence's lips curved. "All of them, darling. Only fools put their money on a single runner this early." They were soon drawn into the evening's rhythm. Servants glided between chairs, soup was ladled into porcelain bowls, and the hum of polite conversation grew to a steady drone. Yet beneath the surface, civility lay threads of tension. The colonel barked an anecdote from his service days, his words too loud, too brittle. The attaché laughed at the wrong moments, his spoon trembling. Madame Varela toyed with her pearls, her laughter silvery, her eyes watchful as they flitted from guest to guest. Tuppence leaned slightly forward, catching a fragment of conversation from the colonel to his neighbour. Paper never should have left the archive, not even for an hour. He stopped abruptly, realising his slip, and drowned the rest in a cough and a swallow of wine. Meanwhile, Tommy engaged the attaché in small talk about cricket scores. It took little effort for him to steer the subject toward the dinner 3 nights before. The young man blanched, stammering that he had noticed nothing unusual, though his fingers twisted his napkin until the thread strained. Tommy, with his practised air of geniality, let him flounder, but filed the reaction away. The courses rolled on, fish, then a joint of beef carved with ritual solemnity. At one point Madame Varela leaned across the table, her voice low, her accent caressing each word. "England is blessed with many friends, and a few who pretend friendship. One must always be careful whom one dines with, no?" Her eyes met Tuppence's, a spark of amusement, or warning, passing between them. Tuppence returned the look steadily. "Carefulness is a virtue, madame, but sometimes too much caution leaves one in the dark." The foreign woman's smile deepened, unreadable. As dessert was served, chocolate soufflé with a drift of cream, Tuppence felt the faintest brush at her side. She glanced down, but the servant who had placed her dish had already retreated. Reaching for her purse, she slipped it open beneath the tablecloth. Inside, her fingers found a folded slip of paper. She palmed it, her expression unchanged, and later, under the cover of conversation, passed it to Tommy. He opened it discreetly, his features tightening as he read. "The thief dined among you." For a moment the clink of silverware and the low murmur of voices seemed distant, as though the entire room had receded. Whoever had delivered the note knew their purpose here, and sought to guide or mislead them. Tuppence allowed herself no outward sign, only a calm sip of wine. But inside her mind the calculations raced. Was the note a genuine clue, or bait meant to draw them deeper into peril? And from whom? The colonel, stiff with suppressed guilt, the attaché, twitching with nerves, or the glamorous madame, weaving webs with her laughter. The evening drew to a close with port and cigars for the gentlemen, liqueurs for the ladies. Tommy played his part cheerfully, laughing at a diplomat's joke, while Tuppence murmured pleasantries to Madame Varela. Yet each detail lodged in their minds: the colonel's abrupt silence, the attaché's perspiring brow, the foreign woman's glint of knowledge. As the guests began to disperse into the foggy night, Tommy offered his arm once more. "Well, old girl, we've a table full of suspects and a note from a ghost. Care to hazard your first guess?" Tuppence smiled faintly, her eyes narrowing as she glanced back at the dining room. "Not yet, darling. Tonight was merely the overture. The real symphony begins now." They stepped out into the mist, the echoes of conversation and the weight of secrets following them like shadows. London had a way of turning itself into a stage whenever fog rolled in, and that night it seemed as though every street lamp and cobblestone had been cast for a play of shadows. Leaving the Westminster Club, Tommy and Tuppence walked briskly along the embankment, their figures swallowed by the shifting mist. The foghorns of the riverboats moaned through the gloom, and the oily ripple of the Thames mirrored faint glimmers of gaslight. "It's as if London is conspiring with our enemies," Tommy muttered, his breath a pale cloud. "Every corner looks designed for an ambush." Tuppence pulled her wrap closer and smiled, though her eyes were keen. "Oh, don't complain, darling. Fog is a blessing. It conceals us as much as it conceals them." "Them?" She inclined her head slightly. "Don't be obvious, but there's been a bowler hat trailing us since we left the club. Third lamppost on the right." Tommy resisted the urge to glance back. "You saw him?" "I felt him. Shoes too neat for a common tale, gait too steady for a drunk. Our note-sender, perhaps, or our thief." The echo of footsteps came and went, sometimes close, sometimes distant. The fog folded in, thickening so that even the lamplight seemed drowned. They quickened their pace, but the rhythm behind them matched theirs. At Westminster Bridge they paused, ostensibly to admire the blurred outlines of Parliament rising like a phantom across the river. Tommy slipped a hand into his pocket, fingers brushing the small revolver he had carried since the war. "We can either confront him or lose him," he said. "Lose him," Tuppence replied. "Confrontation should come when the audience is wider." They moved again, ducking suddenly into a narrow alley that reeked of wet stone and coal smoke. The footsteps followed, then stopped. Silence pressed around them, broken only by the hiss of water dripping from a gutter. "He's clever," Tommy whispered. "Knows the game." Or knows us. The fog shifted, and for a moment the silhouette appeared, a man in a bowler hat, tall, shoulders squared, standing at the far end of the alley. Then, as quickly as the mist swirled, he was gone. Tuppence strode forward, unafraid, her heels sharp against the stones. "Come along, Tommy. Ghosts don't wear polished boots." They searched the length of the alley, but found no man, only the faintest scrap of parchment lodged against the iron grating of a drain. Tuppence bent, lifted it carefully, and held it to the glow of the nearest lamp. The fog made reading difficult, but the fragment bore 2 letters in faded ink. "I.C." "Initials," Tommy murmured. "But whose?" Tuppence studied it, brow furrowed. "Not from the attaché. His name is Paul Denning, not from the colonel either. Blackwood's initials don't fit, unless it stands for something other than a name." "Or someone who prefers to go by a code name," Tuppence countered. The scrap was too small, the edges jagged where it had been torn from something larger. Yet the paper itself was not ordinary. It had a watermark, faint but discernible when angled to the light. A crown insignia, government issue. Tommy slipped it into his pocket. Then it belonged to someone at the club, certainly. They lingered by the bridge, listening. Barges moved like hulking beasts on the river, and somewhere a clock tolled 10. The night pressed close, intimate, as though every swirl of fog carried a whisper meant only for them. Tuppence shivered, not from cold, but from intuition. This isn't random, Tommy. Whoever left that note in my purse tonight is the same person who wants us to find this scrap. We're being led along like breadcrumbs. And you're content to follow? Of course. What else are breadcrumbs for? They moved on, weaving through streets that blurred in sameness. Arches, narrow lanes, wrought iron fences glimpsed and lost again. Their mysterious follower did not reappear. Instead, the fog seemed to press them into solitude. At last they reached a small square, half hidden by the mist, with a single gas lamp sputtering bravely against the damp. A man stood waiting beneath it, hands clasped behind his back. Tommy's hand tightened on his wife's arm. Wait, I know that stance. The figure turned as they approached, revealing a lean face, hawkish nose, and eyes quick as blades. Recognition struck them both. Gracious heavens, Tuppence breathed. It's Charles Ingram. Charles Ingram, known to them from their wartime intelligence days. A man of unfailing resourcefulness and, more often than not, questionable morals. I see, Tommy said softly. The initials. Ingram gave a slight bow, his thin smile half amusement, half mockery. Still sharp, Beresford, and Mrs. Beresford as radiant as ever. What on earth are you doing here? Tuppence demanded, trailing us through the fog like a spectre. Trailing you? His laugh was low, edged with irony. My dear lady, I thought it was you trailing me. I left the club shortly after you did. I saw the interest you were taking in certain conversations. Convenient, Tommy said, that you should appear precisely where we find a clue pointing to your initials. Ingram's smile widened. Clues have a way of pointing to whomever the hand behind them wishes. Surely you don't think I'd be clumsy enough to leave calling cards lying about? Tuppence studied him keenly. The fog wove in and out between them, blurring outlines, making his expression unreadable. If you didn't drop the parchment, who did? Someone who wishes you to doubt me, and I can hardly blame them. Suspicion has been my companion since the war. Perhaps I've earned it. Why were you at the club then? Tommy asked. Ingram's gaze flickered. Officially, as a guest of the Colonel. Unofficially, to see whether certain secrets would surface, secrets better left buried. The silence stretched, heavy, charged. Then he inclined his head. But enough of this. I see the fog unsettles you. You should go home before you lose yourselves in it. Trust me, London's fog swallows more than just footsteps. And with that, he vanished into the mist, his figure dissolving as though it had been conjured only to trouble their thoughts. Tommy exhaled sharply. Well, that was charming. The one man we know capable of treachery appears at the very moment his initials show up on a clue. Which makes it all too neat, Tuppence replied. Ingram is many things, but not careless. If he's guilty, he wouldn't leave scraps of paper pointing to himself. No, darling, this is someone else's trick. Perhaps, or perhaps Ingram wants us to believe exactly that. The debate lingered as they returned toward their flat, the fog dogging every step. Their minds circled the puzzle, a missing file, a dinner of suspects, a bowler-hatted follower, a scrap marked IC, and an old ally or enemy resurfacing from the shadows of war. As they turned the final corner, the street ahead stretched empty, save for one lingering sound, the echo of footsteps retreating into the mist. Kensington, with its tidy crescents and respectable squares, wore the fog differently from the Embankment. Here it softened the edges of neat townhouses and muffled the clatter of passing cabs, lending the impression of wealth preserved under glass. Yet when Tommy and Tuppence mounted the steps of Colonel Blackwood's residence, a narrow, ivy-clad building with a brass knocker polished to military brightness, there was nothing softened about the atmosphere. The Colonel himself answered the door. He was tall still, shoulders square, though his frame had thinned to sinew and bone. His moustache was bristled, his voice clipped. Beresfords, I wondered when you'd come. There was no offer of warmth. He stepped aside, allowing them in with the efficiency of a man accustomed to inspection. The hallway smelled faintly of pipe smoke and mothballs. "Sit, if you must," he barked, leading them into a drawing room cluttered with the detritus of service. Framed maps, faded regimental flags, a sabre mounted above the mantel, and a dozen photographs of young men in uniform. The fire crackled, though it seemed to throw little warmth. Tuppence accepted a chair with poise, surveying the room. Tommy, noting the tremor in Blackwood's hand as he adjusted a photograph, remained standing. "We were at the Westminster Club," Tommy began conversationally. "A curious dinner, Colonel. Files going astray, whispers in the fog. Your name was mentioned." Blackwood stiffened, jaw tightening. "Loose tongues, there always were. I retired years ago. My service is finished." Tuppence smiled gently. "Forgive me, Colonel, but you don't seem the sort to let go of unfinished business, especially if it concerns men you once commanded." His eyes flicked toward her, sharp despite his years. "You think I know who holds it?" "I think," she replied evenly, "you know what's in it." For a long moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire. Then, with a grunt, the Colonel lowered himself into an armchair. His gaze went to the wall of photographs, and when he spoke again, his voice carried both pride and bitterness. "I don't know its present keeper, but I know too well what would be inside such a file. During the war, we relied on shadows, men who weren't quite ours, and men of ours who weren't quite loyal. Double agents, Mrs. Beresford. That's what your missing file contains, the record of them. Names, code names, missions. Some of those men are dead, some very much alive." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. And if those names were revealed, compromise, blackmail, treason dressed as diplomacy, foreign powers would pay dearly to know which of their sons sang for Britain and which of ours were bought. It would ruin careers. It could topple governments. His hand shook slightly as he reached for a pipe from the table. He didn't light it, only held it, as though for comfort. The war may be over, but its shadows linger. Some men never stepped back into the light. Tuppence leaned forward. "Are you telling us one of those shadows is here, in London, at the Westminster Club?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "I'm telling you nothing of the sort. I should not have spoken at all. You are amateurs, whatever Harcourt believes. This is not your game." "On the contrary," Tommy said lightly, though his eyes were cool, "it's exactly our game, and your hesitation, Colonel, suggests you know more than you care to admit." The Colonel surged to his feet, the pipe clattering to the hearth. "Enough! I won't have my loyalty questioned in my own house." The sudden outburst startled even the clock on the mantel, which chimed a muffled note as if in apology. Blackwood stood rigid, his breath coming fast. For the first time, Tommy saw not authority but fear etched into the old soldier's face. Tuppence, ever the diplomat, rose slowly. "We don't mean to accuse, but someone at that dinner removed a file with knowledge of its worth. We simply hoped you might help us narrow the field." He turned his back, staring into the fire. "There was betrayal then. There is betrayal now. Mark my words, Mrs. Beresford. MI6 harbours men whose allegiance is to themselves alone, but I'll not be the one to point fingers. That way lies ruin." The dismissal was clear. He gestured toward the door with brusque finality. "You've had your answers. Now go." Reluctantly they obeyed. Yet as Tommy moved toward the hall, his eye caught a corner of parchment on the desk near the window. A letter, unsigned, the handwriting cramped and anxious. The paper bore the same faint watermark as the scrap they had found by the bridge, a crown insignia, government issue. He said nothing, only filed the observation away. But Tuppence, sharp as ever, let her glove rest briefly on the desk as she passed, palming the Colonel's address book with deft ease. Outside, the fog had thinned, leaving the lamps to burn clearer. They walked in silence until they reached the corner. Tommy exhaled. Well, he knows something. That tremor in his hand wasn't age, it was fear. Fear of what he said, or of what he didn't. "And did you notice the letter?" Tuppence murmured, slipping the address book into her bag. "Same watermark as our scrap. The Colonel receives communications from someone with access to government stationery, someone who wants to keep their name off the record. Interesting collection of acquaintances he keeps. Which is why," she said with satisfaction, "I borrowed his little black book. Let's see who's worth writing to in the Colonel's twilight years." Tommy chuckled, though his eyes remained thoughtful. "One of these days, Tuppence, your nimble fingers will land us in a cell." "Better a cell than a grave," she countered. "Besides, you always said you admired my initiative." He smiled, but the unease lingered. For all their discoveries, the Colonel's fear, the mention of double agents, the unsigned letter, they had no clearer path to the missing file, only shadows growing longer. As they turned toward the glow of Piccadilly, Tuppence drew her coat tighter. "Do you know what frightens me most, Tommy?" "Enlighten me." That Harcourt was right. This isn't a simple theft. It's betrayal, and betrayal always cuts deepest when it comes from one's own. The fog swallowed her words, carrying them into the night like another whisper from the city itself, one more secret added to London's endless store. London knew how to dress itself for spectacle. That evening, Grosvenor Square shimmered beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers that spilled from tall windows and danced upon the polished bonnets of waiting motor cars. Inside the grand townhouse of Lady Ashworth, patroness of half the city's causes and confidante of the rest, Madame Varella was to be the jewel of the evening, and the Beresfords intended to watch her glitter closely. The staircase rose in marble sweep, the banisters entwined with fresh roses. A string quartet played in the gallery above, notes rising like champagne bubbles, while the scent of wax polish mingled with expensive perfume. Guests arrived in glittering gowns and white tie, each carrying secrets behind their laughter. Tuppence, wrapped in silk the colour of midnight, leaned to Tommy as they entered the throng. "Observe the battlefield, darling. Diplomats to the left, financiers to the right, and in the centre our quarry, dressed to kill, naturally." Madame Varella did not disappoint. She stood beneath a gilded mirror, silver satin clinging to her form, her dark hair crowned with a diamond comb. Around her, men hovered like moths to a flame, eager for her smile, her laugh, her whispered aside. She thrived on attention, but there was calculation in the tilt of her head, the slow drag of her cigarette, the way her eyes weighed each suitor and found them wanting. Tommy murmured, "If she knows anything of that file, she won't surrender it to flattery." "Which is why," Tuppence replied briskly, "it falls to me." She crossed the room with effortless grace, inserting herself into the circle as if she had been invited by right. "Madame Varella," she said warmly, "I was hoping we might meet again. I so admired your wit at the club dinner." The socialite's eyes glimmered with amusement. "Mrs. Beresford, what a charming surprise. And your husband too. Ah, there he lingers at the refreshment table, as Englishmen do. You must tell me, does he prefer the port or the gossip?" "Both, in equal measure," Tuppence returned, "though he's clever enough to know that gossip, well filtered, lasts longer than port." The men laughed politely and drifted, leaving the two women alone. Varella exhaled a plume of smoke, studying Tuppence with feline interest. "You are no mere society wife. I can tell by your eyes, always measuring, always calculating." "And you, madame, are no mere ornament of these gatherings," Tuppence replied, matching her tone. "You collect whispers as others collect jewels." Varella's lips curved. "Whispers are more valuable. Jewels can be stolen." Across the room, Tommy busied himself with a glass of champagne, keeping his stance casual. Yet his ears strained toward a nearby cluster of men speaking in low tones. Words drifted through: treaty, concessions, pacts. The language of diplomacy, sharp and brittle. One phrase caught his attention: leverage over cabinet, before it was hushed into mutters. He filed it away for later. Meanwhile, Varella tapped her cigarette against the edge of a crystal dish. "So tell me, Mrs. Beresford, do you find England content with herself these days, or does she still dream of debts unpaid?" Tuppence tilted her head. "England forgets her debts quickly, perhaps too quickly." The woman's eyes gleamed. "Ah, but others do not." The words lingered, a blade wrapped in silk. Tuppence smiled lightly, though her mind raced. Was the remark directed at her, at England, or at the missing file? As the evening advanced, partners changed, dances began. Tommy, drawn into a waltz with Lady Ashworth's niece, contrived to position himself near the cloakroom. When a servant entered bearing a small tray, a pair of gloves slipped and fell unnoticed. Tommy stooped, retrieving them. Fine kid leather, embroidered with delicate initials, M.V. He turned them over in his hand, thoughtful, left behind by accident, or placed for someone to find. When he later showed them to Tuppence, she arched a brow. Too convenient, Tommy. If Madame Varella truly wished to conceal her part in this affair, she wouldn't scatter embroidered breadcrumbs. Unless, Tommy countered, she wants us to suspect her, while the real thief works in shadow. Their chance to probe deeper came near midnight, when the crowd thinned and the hostess herself retired upstairs. The music softened, the conversations grew intimate. Tuppence steered Madame Varella to a quiet alcove lined with books, while Tommy loitered just beyond. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Tuppence asked gently. Varella's eyes flicked upward. "Enjoy what?" "The game. Hints, glances, secrets folded inside secrets. You drop a phrase like debts unpaid and watch us try to puzzle it out." The socialite's smile deepened. "Is that not what life is? A masquerade where only the clever survive?" "Then let us be clever together," Tuppence urged. "Tell me about the file." For the first time, Varella's expression faltered. Barely, but enough. She recovered swiftly, laughter spilling out like champagne. "Ah, you English, always so serious. What makes you think I care for dusty papers locked in attaché cases?" "Because you were at the club when it vanished," Tuppence said softly. "Because you watch every guest as if weighing their worth. And because you speak of debts as if one of them is owed to you." The silence that followed was not empty but charged, filled with the hiss of the gas lamps and the murmur of distant dancers. Finally, Varella stubbed out her cigarette with deliberate care. "Listen well, Mrs. Beresford. Files, documents, secrets, these are trifles. But debts. Debts last. England made promises during the war. Some were honoured, others discarded. Those discarded promises still have teeth, and if certain papers were to reappear, they might remind England of her forgotten obligations." Her eyes blazed suddenly, and Tuppence glimpsed beneath the satin mask a woman forged in harder fires. Then, just as swiftly, the mask returned. "But come, we speak too seriously. Tell me instead, do you waltz?" The moment dissolved into the swirl of music, yet the words echoed, heavy with implication. Later, as the Beresfords departed into the chill night, Tommy offered his arm. "Well, do we have her?" Tuppence shook her head. "We have suspicion, we have embroidered gloves, and we have a warning about debts, but certainty, no. She may be spy, pawn, or distraction, and that, my dear, is what makes her dangerous." They walked in silence, the glow of the soiree fading behind them. Ahead, London stretched dark and uncertain, full of whispers yet to be heard. The London night had grown sharp with cold by the time the Beresfords returned to their flat in South Audley Street. The city had shed its evening finery, the last of the theatre crowds had gone home, and the streets lay still beneath a pale moon. Tommy unlocked the door with the ease of habit, but as it swung open, both he and Tuppence froze. A faint draught stirred the curtains in the hall. The scent of their home, polish, flowers, the faint spice of Tuppence's perfume, was marred by something acrid. Tobacco, not their own. Tommy's voice was low. "We've had visitors." The drawing-room bore the marks of an intrusion. Papers lay scattered across the carpet, drawers hung half open, cushions flung aside. Yet nothing appeared taken. The silver-framed photographs were still on the mantel. The small clock ticked steadily. The disarray was purposeful, not reckless. Tuppence stepped carefully over the papers, her expression tightening. "This isn't theft, it's examination. Someone was looking for something they thought we had." Tommy closed the door firmly, scanning the room, "and wanted us to know it." For there, on the writing desk, lay a single object set apart from the chaos, a matchbook, stamped with the crest of the Westminster Club. Tuppence lifted it delicately, turning it in her hand. "Our dinner companion left us a calling card." "Or our follower in the fog," Tommy muttered. "Either way, it's deliberate. No burglar worth his salt would be so tidy in his messaging." They moved from room to room. The study had been rifled, every drawer pulled, though Tommy's revolver was untouched in its locked case. In the bedroom, the wardrobe doors gaped, clothes shifted, but not stolen. Tuppence's jewel box was open, pearls spilling across the velvet lining, but the pieces themselves remained. The violation was subtle, but profound. The home they had always considered safe, their retreat from the world's shadows, had been turned inside out by unseen hands. At the back door, Tuppence bent suddenly. "Look," she whispered. In the soft earth by the garden gate were footprints, faint but distinct. Not the heavy tread of a man's boot, but narrower, lighter, almost hesitant. "Smaller than mine," Tommy said, crouching beside her. "Not a woman's heel either, more like a young man's shoe." "The attaché," Tuppence breathed. "Paul Denning. Nervous, sweating, fidgeting. Exactly the sort to blunder in and leave a trail." "Or exactly the sort to be framed for it," Tommy countered. "If we're finding these prints, you can be certain they were meant to be found." The night pressed close around them, quiet save for the rustle of the garden leaves. Tuppence rose, her chin lifting. Whoever it was, they were bold, and they know we're involved now, whether we chose it or not. Tommy locked the gate with deliberate care, which means they're watching us, even now. Back inside, Tuppence began straightening the room with brisk hands. "We can't let them think we're rattled." Tommy caught her wrist gently. "We are rattled, old girl. At least I am. We've seen espionage before, but this isn't the battlefield or the bureau. This is our home, and I'll be dashed if I let you walk into the jaws of it without caution." She looked at him steadily. "And I'll be dashed if I let some faceless thief chase us into hiding. If they want to rattle us, we'll rattle back. We must pursue, Tommy, boldly, before the trail goes cold." Their gazes locked, affection mingling with the familiar tension of strategy. He wanted to shield, she wanted to strike. It had always been thus between them, and always somehow they met in the middle. "All right," he said at last, releasing her hand. "Boldly, but not blindly. We'll chase our quarry, but with our eyes open and our backs covered." Tuppence smiled, softening. "That's all I ask." As they restored order to the study, Tommy examined the matchbook again. Its pages were unused, pristine. Inside the cover, in faint pencil, a number had been scrawled. 17. No more, no less. 17, he murmured. A room, a table, or just the age of our mysterious intruder? Tuppence tucked it into her bag. "We'll know when the time comes. For now, it's our only lead." The night wore on. They brewed tea in the small kitchen, the ritual steadying their nerves. Yet both felt the watchful silence outside, as though unseen eyes lingered at the edge of the garden. At last, Tommy drew the curtains firmly shut. "Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we press harder." But Tuppence, staring at the matchbook on the bedside table, knew sleep would not come easily. The shadows had entered their own house, and once shadows crossed that threshold, they were never easily banished. London was grey that morning, the kind of grey that made the river look like tarnished pewter and the rooftops like ash. After the violation of their home, Tommy and Tuppence had little patience for subtlety. They knew the next step. Paul Denning, the twitchy junior attaché who had sweated through dinner at the Westminster Club. If anyone had slipped and left a trail, it would be him. They found him in a tea shop off Fleet Street, the kind of place favoured by clerks and typists. The air smelled of strong tea and damp wool, the windows fogged by breath and steam. Denning sat alone at a corner table, hands wrapped too tightly around a cup. His eyes darted to the door when the Beresfords entered, and the liquid nearly sloshed over the rim. "Mr. Denning," Tuppence said brightly, sliding into the seat opposite. "How fortunate! We were hoping to run into you." Tommy settled beside her, his genial smile a mask. "Tea's always better with company, eh?" Denning's Adam's apple bobbed. I should be at the office." "Nonsense," Tuppence cut in smoothly. "The office will manage. But you, my dear man, may not manage unless you tell us what you've been too frightened to say." He blinked, colour draining from his cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Tommy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We know someone entered our home last night. They left a matchbook from the Westminster Club, and footprints much like yours. Care to explain that?" Denning shook his head rapidly. No, that wasn't me. I would never." His breath quickened. I only wanted to keep out of it. I didn't steal anything, I swear it." Tuppence's tone was kind, but her eyes were steel. "Then what did you see at the dinner?" The young man's hands trembled so violently the teaspoon rattled in its saucer. "I shouldn't speak. They warned me." "They?" Tommy prompted. Denning swallowed hard. I saw "I saw someone take the file. Not Madame Varela, though everyone suspects her. It was a man in authority, someone trusted, high in the service itself." The hum of the tea shop seemed to fade, leaving only his words hanging in the air. Tuppence's heart gave a sharp jolt. "Who?" she demanded softly. Denning shook his head. Sweat beaded at his temples. "If I say, I'm done for. They'll ruin me, or worse. You don't know what they're capable of." Before Tommy could press further, the bell above the tea shop door jingled. A tall figure stepped inside, shoulders broad beneath a dark overcoat, bowler hat pulled low. He scanned the room once, his gaze landing squarely on their table. Denning's eyes widened in terror. "Oh God, they've found me." The man strode over, his presence like a storm cloud. He bent slightly, his voice pitched low but cutting. "Best leave well enough alone, Beresfords. You too, Mr. Denning. Curiosity's a dangerous habit." Tommy straightened, his geniality gone. "And threats are a clumsy one. Care to introduce yourself?" The man's lips curved in something that wasn't a smile. "Names aren't necessary. Warnings are." His eyes lingered on Tuppence, hard and unflinching. Then he turned and walked out, the bell jangling again as the door swung shut. Denning was already on his feet, panic overtaking him. "I can't. I mustn't." He fumbled for coins, dropping half on the table, and bolted through the rear exit into the alley. "Wait!" Tuppence called, rising quickly, but he was gone. On the table beside the abandoned teacup lay a small leather-bound notebook. It must have slipped from Denning's coat in his haste. Tommy picked it up, frowning. He left us something whether he meant to or not. Back at their flat, they examined the notebook under the lamplight. The pages were filled not with prose, but with strings of letters, numbers, and symbols. A code. Tuppence tapped the margins thoughtfully. Denning kept a diary of sorts. Not words, but ciphers. "See here. These clusters repeat. Like dates or meeting places." Tommy traced one line with his finger. "And this entry. A place name, if I'm not mistaken. Look. HH, repeated several times. Hampstead Heath." Tuppence's pulse quickened. A meeting place. He must have known of some rendezvous, some handover. He couldn't speak it aloud, but he recorded it here. They worked together, piecing fragments of the cipher. It wasn't a full key, but enough to suggest time and place. One entry stood out, HH, 10, Thursday. "That's tomorrow night," Tommy said grimly. Tuppence closed the notebook, her expression resolute. "Then tomorrow night, we'll be there. If our enemies meet in shadows, we'll meet them there. And this time, we'll be ready." The matchbook, the footprints, the whispered warning, all pointed to danger drawing closer. Yet the cipher had given them direction. As the fire burned low in the grate, Tommy poured them each a measure of brandy. "This has gone beyond a missing file. There's betrayal at the heart of it, and men willing to kill to keep it hidden." Tuppence raised her glass, eyes steady. "Then let them try. We've faced worse, and if Denning couldn't find the courage to speak, we'll find it for him." Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere in London footsteps echoed in alleys. Unseen watchers kept their vigil. The Beresfords knew the game had sharpened. It was no longer about curiosity or gossip. It was survival. The moon rode high above Hampstead Heath, a pale lantern casting its silver light across the undulating grass and the tangle of oaks. The night was crisp, every sound sharpened, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of the city far below. Tommy and Tuppence moved carefully along a worn path, their coats pulled close, their breath visible in the chill. "Not the most romantic of outings," Tommy murmured. Tuppence smiled faintly. "On the contrary, darling. Moonlight, mystery, and danger. What could be more romantic?" Her eyes scanned the shadows with practiced keenness. Denning's cipher had been clear enough. Hampstead Heath, Thursday at 10. They were early, positioning themselves behind a cluster of trees that offered both cover and vantage. From there they could see a clearing where the path widened, the moonlight pouring down like a spotlight upon a stage. They waited. Time stretched, taut as wire. Then, at the stroke of 10, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark overcoat carrying a briefcase. He glanced about, then checked his watch, the gesture sharp and military. Moments later, two others appeared from the opposite side, one stockier, hat brim low, the other lean and restless. They carried themselves with the wariness of men accustomed to danger. The first carried a small case of his own. Tommy breathed, "An exchange." The men met in the centre of the clearing. Words were spoken in low tones, inaudible at the Beresfords' distance. Then, with casual precision, the briefcase changed hands. The smaller case, a money case no doubt, passed the other way. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. That's it. That's the file, or part of it. But even as she whispered, her sharp ears caught another sound, the faint crack of a twig behind them. She turned swiftly, her breath catching. From the deeper shadows another man advanced, his face obscured by the brim of a bowler hat. He froze when he saw them, then raised a hand in warning. "Too late, Beresfords," he hissed. "You've seen enough." The men in the clearing turned sharply at his words. In an instant the tableau shattered. The stocky man cursed, snapping his case shut. The one with the briefcase bolted, plunging toward the trees. The bowler-hatted watcher lunged at Tommy and Tuppence. Tommy reacted fast, shoving Tuppence aside as the man swung. The blow missed by inches. Tommy countered with a sharp jab, enough to stagger the attacker, then grab Tuppence's hand. "Run!" They fled into the open heath, the moon casting long shadows as pursuit thundered behind them. The grass whipped at their legs, uneven ground threatening to trip them, but adrenaline carried them on. "Left!" Tuppence gasped, dragging him toward a dip in the land. They scrambled down, breathless, crouching as footsteps thundered past overhead. For a moment they lay still, hearts pounding, the cold earth damp beneath them. But the reprieve was brief. A new pursuer spotted them and shouted, "There!" Tommy and Tuppence scrambled up the far side of the dip. The clearing lay ahead, the briefcase man still running. Desperation seized Tommy. If they could not capture the thief, perhaps they could capture a piece of what he carried. He sprinted, overtaking the man enough to collide with him in passing. The briefcase jolted, papers spilling into the grass. Tommy snatched at the nearest sheet before the man wrenched the case back and disappeared into the trees. Tuppence grabbed his arm, urging him on. They plunged into cover, dodging through branches until the shouts behind them grew fainter. At last they stumbled into a hollow sheltered by hawthorn, collapsing to catch their breath. In Tommy's hand lay the sheet of paper, torn, crumpled, but legible. Tuppence smoothed it under the moonlight, her brow furrowing as she read. "It's not a list of agents. It's correspondence. A letter. Listen." Her voice lowered as she read aloud. "The leverage we hold is not in their armies, but in their leaders. Names can be tarnished, reputations destroyed. With this file, cabinet itself may be made to bend." Tommy exhaled. So it's not just espionage secrets. It's blackmail, political leverage over the highest offices. Tuppence's eyes flashed. "That's why they'll kill to keep it hidden. This isn't about the past. It's about power now." They folded the fragment carefully, tucking it into Tuppence's coat. Around them the night was quiet again, save for the wind in the branches. The pursuers had scattered in confusion, but the danger was far from over. Tommy gave a grim smile. "Well, we've gone from breadcrumbs to feast, and now every fox in London knows we've had a taste." Tuppence rose, brushing the dirt from her skirt. "Then we'll make sure we don't choke on it. Come on, darling, let's get this home before the heath swallows us too." They slipped away through the winding paths, their senses sharp to every sound. The city lights beckoned faintly in the distance, a reminder of civilization waiting beyond the shadows. But both knew they carried more than a scrap of paper. They carried proof that the missing file was no mere relic, but a weapon poised against the heart of government itself. And their enemies, whoever they were, now understood that the Beresfords were too close for comfort. The next morning broke with a pale, wintry sun that seemed to offer no warmth at all. The Beresfords took their breakfast in silence, both of them still feeling the echo of the chase across Hampstead Heath. The fragment of the letter lay on the table between them, weighted by the sugar bowl, as if it might otherwise take flight and vanish. Tommy stirred his tea absently. "It's one thing to chase shadows, Tuppence, quite another when the shadows start chasing back." She buttered a slice of toast with calm precision, which is precisely why we mustn't stop. The letter proves the file isn't about old intelligence. It's leverage over men in power today. That makes it more dangerous than we thought. He glanced at the folded sheet. cabinet itself may be made to bend. The words had the cold, impersonal weight of a noose. They had little choice but to return to Whitehall. If Sir Reginald Harcourt truly wanted the file recovered, he needed to know what they had discovered. And if he didn't, well, then they needed to know that too. The corridors of Whitehall were as hushed as ever, a place where footsteps were muffled and voices trimmed themselves to whispers. The Beresfords were ushered into Harcourt's office without ceremony. He was waiting, immaculate as before, the desk cleared as though no work had ever touched it. Only his eyes betrayed tension, a sharpness that belied the calm exterior. "Well," he said. Tommy laid the folded fragment on the desk. "We found this at Hampstead Heath. There was an exchange, briefcase for money. We intercepted only this page, but it's enough. The file isn't just wartime secrets, it's political dynamite." Harcourt read the letter silently. His expression did not change, yet his hand lingered on the page a beat too long. At last he said, "This is concerning." "Concerning?" Tuppence repeated, incredulous. "It's damning. Someone intends to blackmail the cabinet with the file. You must act quickly." He placed the page in a drawer and shut it. "You've done well, but from here the matter is delicate. I advise you to step back." Tommy frowned. "Step back? With respect, Sir Reginald, you brought us into this. We're already in too far." "You've risked much," Harcourt said evenly. "But the service cannot afford amateurs meddling further. If word spread that civilians interfered in state secrets—" "Civilians?" Tuppence's eyes flashed. "We've risked our necks, been followed, nearly run down. We've seen more than your men care to admit. Don't patronize us, Sir Reginald. You're telling us to step back, not for our safety, but for yours." Silence stretched. The air in the office seemed colder. Harcourt's gaze sharpened. "You tread on dangerous ground, Mrs. Beresford." Tommy rose, his tone genial but edged. "Then perhaps we should tread elsewhere. Come along, Tuppence." They left the office without another word, the sound of the door closing behind them like the snap of a trap. In the street outside, Tuppence exhaled hard. "Did you see him? The way he put that page away, as though it belonged to him all along." Tommy nodded grimly. "And the sudden eagerness to have us bow out. He doesn't want us tripping over something meant to stay hidden." Her eyes narrowed. "Which means the mole isn't some faceless spy at the club. It's inside Whitehall, perhaps even Harcourt himself." They walked in silence for several minutes, the city bustling around them, its noise at odds with the dark suspicion pressing in. Then Tuppence halted, her eyes alight. "The diary, Denning's cipher. There was a sequence of initials I puzzled over. R.H. It repeated, paired with dates. At first I thought it was nothing, but after this morning—" "R.H.," Tommy said slowly. "Reginald Harcourt." Her hand tightened on his arm. "Denning recorded meetings with Harcourt. He must have suspected something, and now Denning is too frightened or too silenced to tell us more." Tommy whistled softly. "If Harcourt is the mole, we're in deeper than I care to imagine." "Which is why we mustn't rely on official channels," Tuppence said firmly. "We need another source, someone who plays her own game." "Madame Varela?" She smiled thinly. "Exactly. She thrives on self-preservation. If she knows more than she dares say, she'll give us just enough, so long as it serves her." They found her not in a grand drawing room this time, but in a quiet cafe off Piccadilly, her silver cigarette case gleaming on the table beside her untouched cup of coffee. She raised her brows as they approached. "Well," she murmured, "the lover's in arms. Have you come to accuse me again, or to beg my help?" "Neither," Tuppence said smoothly, sliding into the seat opposite. "We've come to trade, information for safety." Madame Varela's eyes glimmered. "Safety is never guaranteed, but information, that can be arranged." Tommy leaned forward. "You were at the club when the file vanished. You know who took it." She exhaled smoke delicately. "Knowing and proving are different matters, but perhaps I can assist you. The attaché's little notebook, you've seen it?" Tuppence's pulse quickened. "How do you know of it?" A soft laugh. "I make it my business to know. Denning was careless. He kept codes beyond his clearance, thinking himself clever. That diary holds more than you realize, but without the proper key, it is useless." She reached into her handbag and produced a slip of paper. On it, a grid of numbers and letters neatly arranged. This is the cipher key. With it, the diary will speak, and you will see whose hands are stained. The same 3 names surface in Colonel Blackwood's book and in Denning's entries, each linked to your private consultations, Sir Reginald. Tommy studied her warily. Why give this to us? Her gaze sharpened. Because I wish to live. If the wrong man believes I hold the file, my life is forfeit. If you expose him first, I am safe. England may forget her debts, but I do not forget my survival. She slid the slip across the table. Tuppence covered it with her hand, her voice low. If we use this, and it leads to Harcourt, what then? Verella's lips curved. Then you will have your traitor, and I will have my freedom. A fair exchange, no? For a moment the 3 women sat in a silence heavy with unspoken bargains. Then Tuppence nodded once. Very well. As they rose to leave, Verella called softly after them. Take care, Mrs. Beresford. Men who betray their country rarely hesitate to betray their friends. Back in their flat, the lamplight burned low as they opened Denning's diary again. With the cipher key in hand, the coded strings unfurled into words. Meetings, dates, names. Tuppence flipped open Blackwood's pilfered address book and ran a finger down its columns. Look, these 3 surnames recur in both places, she murmured. Ashworth, Calthorpe, Ingram. The Colonel kept them close. Denning records them beside Harcourt's meetings. Tommy's jaw set. So Blackwood's old circle overlaps Harcourt's private calls. That narrows who could move a file without questions. And there, repeating with chilling regularity, R.H., private consultation. Tommy read aloud, his voice tight. March 12th, April 4th, May 19th, always with Harcourt, and notes beside them. Delivery promised, payment arranged. Good Lord. Tuppence's eyes blazed. It's him. It must be. Harcourt orchestrated the theft, used Denning as a pawn, and now seeks to frame others while he sells the file piece by piece. The truth pressed down on them, heavy as stone. They had suspected before, but now they knew. And knowledge, they realized, was more dangerous than ignorance, for if Harcourt had betrayed his post, he would not hesitate to silence those who uncovered him. Tommy folded the diary shut. We've crossed the point of no return, Tuppence. From here on, we're not just chasing a thief, we're hunting a traitor at the heart of Whitehall. Her hand found his, steady and sure. And if we must face him, we'll face him together, always together. The fire in the grate flickered, casting their shadows long against the wall. Outside, the wind rattled the windows like a warning. The Beresfords sat side by side, the cipher key between them, knowing that the game had turned lethal, and that their adversary was not a faceless spy, but the very man who had set them on the path. The storm had broken by the time the Beresfords' motorcar wound up the drive to Ashcombe Grange. Rain lashed the windscreen, lightning forked across the moors, and the vast country house loomed like a fortress against the night. Its windows glowed faintly, promising warmth within, but to Tommy and Tuppence it seemed more like the lanterns of a trap. Inside, the drawing-room had been arranged with deliberate care. A great fire roared in the hearth, throwing leaping shadows across carved panelling and gilt-framed portraits. Candles glimmered in sconces along the walls, their flames ghosts flickering in the draught. Chairs had been placed in a semicircle before the hearth, and in those chairs sat the players of the drama. Colonel Blackwood, stiff as ever, Madame Verella, elegant in black silk, young Paul Denning, pale and restless, and Sir Reginald Harcourt, grave and imposing, his presence filling the room like a command. Tommy stood by the mantel, outwardly casual, inwardly taut. Tuppence moved with quiet assurance, pouring sherry for the guests, as though this were nothing more than a country house gathering. Only the steady firelight betrayed the truth, illuminating their faces, catching each flicker of guilt, fear, or defiance. When at last all were seated, Tommy began. His voice was genial, almost conversational. You must forgive us for summoning you here in such weather, but the matter we face will not wait for calmer skies. The missing file, as you all know, contains not dusty wartime trivia, but something far more dangerous. Political leverage. With it, entire governments might be bent to another's will. The colonel grunted, his moustache bristling. "I told you, Beresford, I've no part in this. My service was finished long ago." Madame Varella lifted her glass, her eyes glimmering. "And yet, Colonel, one always wonders why a man protests so loudly." Blackwood shot her a glare but said nothing more. Tommy's gaze swept them all. "We have followed the trail through fog and shadows, through soirees and secret meetings. We have been threatened, pursued, and nearly silenced. But tonight, in the firelight, the truth will stand clear." He turned slightly, nodding to Tuppence. She set her glass down and spoke with calm precision. The thief was clever. He counted on suspicion falling upon convenient scapegoats, the colonel with his war secrets, the attaché with his nerves and his diary, Madame Varella with her foreign glamour and her whispered warnings. Each of you had a part to play in the masquerade, but the hand behind it all was not yours. Harcourt's eyes narrowed. "Then whose, Mrs. Beresford? If you've brought us here merely to spin tales," her gaze locked on him. "Yours, Sir Reginald." The room went still. The storm rattled the windows as though in protest. Blackwood barked a laugh. "Nonsense. Harcourt has been the soul of loyalty." "Has he?" Tuppence asked softly. She drew from her bag Denning's diary, its cipher now unlocked. She held it open, the firelight catching the ink. These entries record private meetings, month after month, between Denning and Harcourt. Promises made, payments arranged. The young man was too frightened to speak it, but he wrote it down, perhaps as insurance, and in doing so, he left us the truth. Denning shifted miserably in his chair. I didn't know what to do. He said it was official business, that I'd ruin myself if I spoke." Harcourt's voice cracked like a whip. "The boy lies. He was weak, he misunderstood. Mrs. Beresford, you grasp at shadows. Do you think I, entrusted with the service, would sell her secrets?" Tommy moved closer, his expression hard. "You've been doing exactly that. Not to weaken England's armies. That would be too obvious. No, you chose a subtler weapon. Reputations, debts, scandals buried in the war years. With those you could hold men in power by the throat, sell to the highest bidder, and watch them dance." Harcourt rose, his face thunderous. "I will not sit here and be slandered by amateurs." "Then sit and be revealed," Tuppence said. She drew from her pocket the fragment of the letter they had taken on Hampstead Heath. Her voice was steady as she read, "Cabinet itself may be made to bend." Then she looked directly at Harcourt. "You used that very phrase when we first brought you the page. Not paraphrased, not guessed. You spoke it word for word, because you had written it yourself." The silence was electric. The colonel's eyes widened. Varella's lips curved in a knowing smile. Denning gave a strangled gasp. Harcourt's hands clenched at his sides. "Coincidence," he said hoarsely. "A common turn of phrase." But the denial was thin, brittle as old glass. Tommy stepped forward, his geniality gone. "Enough. We have the diary, the cipher, the fragment, and your own slip of the tongue. The game is over, Harcourt." For a heartbeat, the fire crackled and the storm raged. Then Harcourt moved. Swift as a striking snake, he snatched at the diary in Tuppence's hands. But Tommy was quicker, intercepting him with a firm grip. The two men grappled, shadows jerking wildly across the panelled walls. Harcourt was strong, desperation lending him force, but Tommy's years had not dulled him. With a final twist, he flung the officer back against the armchair, the diary safe in his grasp. Varella laughed softly, a sound both mocking and relieved. "Ah, the mighty Harcourt, unmasked by husband and wife. England should thank you." Harcourt's face was ashen, his composure shattered. "You fools," he hissed. "Do you think you've won? There are others, higher than me, who will see you silenced. The file is not lost. It is already in motion. You cannot stop what has begun." Tuppence's voice was cold as steel. "Perhaps not, but we can stop you." The colonel stirred, his loyalty bruised. "I never believed, Harcourt, I would have trusted you with my life." Harcourt's gaze flicked to him with contempt. "And that was your mistake." Denning, trembling, whispered, "What will happen to him?" Tommy answered grimly, "That's for the service to decide. But whatever his punishment, his game of betrayal ends tonight." The storm outside began to abate. the thunder rolling away into distance. Within the room, the fire roared, casting its relentless light upon Harcourt's ruined facade. Tuppence and Tommy stood together before the hearth, their hands clasped, their voices sure. They had faced shadows, lies, and betrayals, and in the firelight the truth had burned clear. The morning after Ashcombe Grange dawned clear, as though the storm had swept away every trace of the night's violence. London gleamed under a pale sun, its streets washed clean, its people bustling with the ordinary cares of ordinary days. Only Tommy and Tuppence knew how close those streets had come to being governed not by Parliament, but by whispers of blackmail and treachery. The file, what remained of it, was delivered into MI6 custody with little ceremony. No newspaper carried a word, no clerk acknowledged its passage. It was borne behind oak doors and locked drawers, where silence was its guard. Tommy and Tuppence stood in the corridor outside Whitehall, the echo of their footsteps mingling with the hush of bureaucracy. An anonymous man in a grey suit had taken the evidence from their hands without thanks or explanation. He had said only, "It will be dealt with," and vanished behind a door marked private. Tommy gave a rueful smile. "And there's the rub. We risk life and limb, and it's swept into a drawer with all the grace of yesterday's memorandum." Tuppence adjusted her gloves. "Would you prefer a medal? I think you look rather well without one, darling." He chuckled, but his eyes were thoughtful. "It's the silence that stings. Harcourt was no minor clerk. He was the service itself. If he could fall, how many others play their own games, unmarked and unpunished?" Tuppence's voice softened. "That's not our burden. We did what we could. We brought the truth into the firelight, and that's enough." They walked together into the brisk air, their cab waiting. Yet in their hearts lingered the weight of secrets that had not been shared, and debts that had not been paid. Madame Varela was the first to vanish. Within a day of Harcourt's unmasking, her flat in Mayfair stood empty, her trunk spirited away. Some said she had boarded the morning train to Dover. Others whispered of a yacht that slipped from the Thames under moonlight. The Beresfords received a single note, written in her graceful hand. "My dears, England may forget, but I shall not. You played your part well. For that, you have my thanks, and my warning. Not all debts are forgotten. Yours in discretion, V." Tuppence read it twice, her lips pressed thin. "She's alive, and she's free. That woman could sell ice in winter and still come out with a profit." Tommy tucked the note into the fire. "Let her vanish. Better in Paris or Rome than here. She thrives in the half-light, and perhaps the half-light will keep her harmless for now." The flames consumed the paper, but the words seemed to linger in the room. Not all debts are forgotten. Colonel Blackwood returned to his flat in Kensington, retreating into the solitude of his memorabilia. He accepted their parting handshake stiffly, his eyes haunted but proud. "I warned you," he muttered. "Secrets carry rot with them. Mine will stay with me, and I'll not burden England further." Tuppence had pressed his hand gently. "You carried them long enough, Colonel. Perhaps now you may rest." But his gaze had gone to the medals on his wall, and rest seemed far away. Paul Denning was transferred quietly to another post, far from London. He shook Tommy's hand with fervent gratitude, his diary clutched like a talisman. "I never meant to betray," he whispered. "I only wanted to serve. But fear makes cowards of us all." Tommy's reply was kind but steady. "Fear makes men falter, Denning. It's what you do after that counts." Denning nodded, tears in his eyes, and was gone. And so the pieces scattered, as pieces always do when a case is finished. The world did not pause to applaud. There were no headlines, no grateful speeches. Only the Beresfords returned to their little flat in South Audley Street, where Fritz had left a loaf of bread on the table, and the fire was crackling cheerfully. They shed their coats, sat before the hearth, and let the silence settle around them. For the first time in days they felt safe. Tuppence poured the tea, her movements brisk and familiar. "Well, darling, another case cracked, though I dare say not the kind of puzzle most married couples share." Tommy stretched, sinking into his chair with a groan. "Quite. Most couples settle their disputes over paint colours. We settle ours in Whitehall corridors and country estates." She handed him his cup, her eyes twinkling. "You must admit it keeps the marriage lively." He sipped, savouring the warmth. It does at that, though I could wish for a touch less liveliness next time. Chases over Hampstead Heath are no way to preserve one's digestion. Tuppence laughed softly. Yet you kept pace well enough, and between us we saw through Harcourt's masks. That's what matters. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling, the teacups clinking gently. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise, indifferent to secrets uncovered or traitors unmasked. At length Tommy said, "Do you ever wonder, Tuppence, how many more Harcourts lurk in the shadows? How many more files lie waiting to be stolen, used, sold?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "Always, but I also know that whenever shadows creep too far, someone, somewhere will strike a match, and if we're called again, we'll light it ourselves." He reached across, clasping her hand. "Always together." "Always," she agreed. The fire burned low, casting their faces in warm glow. For a moment they allowed themselves peace, but in the back of Tuppence's mind lingered Madame Varella's words, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Not all debts are forgotten." She tightened her grip on Tommy's hand. The case was closed, the file returned, the traitor exposed. Yet the game of secrets was endless, and debts, whether of loyalty or betrayal, had a way of circling back. For now, though, there was tea, there was warmth, and there was the comfort of facing the world side by side. And that, as both Beresfords knew, was victory enough.